All right, here we go. The last lesson. The last lesson always feels so good. Takes me hours to get to the last lesson every section. I'm finally like, all right, here we go. So hope it feels the same way for you. I hope you feel like you're learning things, you're accomplishing things. There's so much to learn, there's so much to cover, but hopefully you're feeling that kind of, even here in the very beginning, you're feeling that you're being set up so much better for success than you probably have been anywhere else, especially giving free training, let alone personally, I aim to make this substantially better than any paid product that's out there. So hopefully you're saying, hey, some of you guys that have paid $2,000 for a product, I'm hoping are saying, hey, this is the best stuff I've ever seen. So I hope you're feeling that way. I think I'm setting you up for success much better than anything I've ever seen, and I hope you're feeling the same way. So the last thing I want to cover in mindset before we start moving in and we start talking about actual methods and strategies is I want to teach you how to guarantee you achieve your goals. Okay, it may sound, you may raise an eyebrow and go, how can he guarantee that, especially after I've been a naysayer about all this other stuff. It's similar to, hey, if you never stop working, you can't fail. If you never stop trying, you can't fail. You only fail when you give up. So it's kind of along those same that same train of thought, but I think even more actionable and even more workable and even more tangible. So let's talk about how to guarantee you achieve your goals that you set in this industry. A lot of people ask, when am I going to make money? Really common question, and I used to get really frustrated by it, but again, I have to see it from a lot of your perspective and from my perspective early on too, right? When I was 16, 18 years old, before I started making a really decent living in internet marketing, I kind of thought, when am I going to make money? When am I going to see results? How much can I make? So they're not unreasonable questions, but they're very difficult questions to answer. In fact, they're pretty much impossible to answer with any degree of accuracy. Outside of the ballparks, some of the ballparks that I gave in the last video, the last lesson, it's just impossible to answer these questions. And it's impossible to answer these questions because how long it takes, the first part of that question, how long is it going to take? When will I make money? It's really determined by a combination of your competition and how much effort you're putting in. So if you're in a really let's say you're in a really low competition niche. A person, working 20 hours a week is going to get there a lot faster than a person working 10 hours a week. And how much competition is in your industry is based very much on what niche you pick, which we'll talk about in one of the upcoming sections. So it's impossible to say how long it's going to take to succeed because there are so many moving parts. The main ones are competition and the effort you're putting in, but there are so many other moving parts. The quality of work you're putting in too, how well you're following the training. A lot of people skip around in these members areas and then they wonder why 10 months later they feel like they've been busting their butt, but they're not getting results because they're blatantly going against what was taught in the training. If they had just spent the extra hours, whatever it is, 10, 20 hours going through their training early on, they'd be successful if they had put in that amount of time. So there are a lot of moving parts, but when you're going to make money, how long it's going to take is impossible to answer based on those moving parts. And how much money you can make is determined by how large your audience is, how much of a buying audience you're working with in your niche, which I will spend a lot of time very specifically talking about when you're picking a niche, because again, it's something that people skip over a lot of the time. And I think it's like the most important aspect of picking a niche, and how well offers pay in your industry. If the average offer in your industry pays $20 versus the average offer in your industry pays $100, that's going to make a really big difference in how much money you can make. If your audience is only, a maximum of 100,000 people versus your audience being 100 million people, your income cap is going to be a heck of a lot higher with 100 million audience members than it is with 100,000 audience members or 10,000 audience members. So just know that. Just know, if you're looking for answers to these questions, hopefully you trust me at this point. I'm not trying to deceive you. I'm not trying to dance around the topic. There's just no good way to answer them. There are too many moving parts to answer them accurately. The best I can say is the the kind of milestones and the kind of general ballparks that I shared in video 2.2, the video before this. So, knowing that this is true, right? Knowing that it's impossible to predict for even the most experienced person, it's impossible to predict when they're going to start seeing traction. It's impossible to predict how much money they're going to be able to make in that niche. You may have a good idea, like going into a niche, yeah, this niche is highly profitable. I expect to be able to make a full-time income minimum from this. But you're not going to know if that's going to tap out at $3,000 a month or $5,000 a month or $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month. You just don't know until you enter the niche and you build it up. You can have a good idea, which again, we'll talk about that in the training when you're picking a niche. But knowing that all of this is true, setting money-based goals doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. I know it's what our tendency as human beings is. It makes sense that we do it. On the surface, it seems to make sense that we say, hey, I'm going to measure my progress by, in a year, am I making $1,000 a month? You know, you can kind of have those loosely in your mind. They're not wrong to have. Just don't get too attached to them, because at the end of the day, as I'm going to talk about in this lesson, a lot of that is out of your control. Setting money-based goals is, you have so little control over how much money your results are going, or your efforts are going to result in, that it just doesn't make sense to set goals that way. And so I'll dig into this a little bit. So what does make sense? If I'm not setting goals based on money, what am I setting goals based on? You need to set, you don't need to, right? You can keep saying, I want to make $10,000 a month. And we talked about the reverse math to set you up for success best in section 1. About, you know, reverse math and how to kind of reverse engineer those milestones. But so you can keep doing that. You're just going to find yourself a lot more disappointed more often, and you are also you're more likely, guaranteed, it's not probably, you are guaranteed more likely to wash out of this industry. Because if you say, I'm going to hit you know, $1,000 a month within 6 months, and you don't hit it, it's overwhelming, it's defeating, it's deflating, it's depressing, it's hard on you. And every time you go through that, you're more and more likely to wash out of the industry. So the thing I want to do is make sure I decrease the chances of that happening as much as possible for your own success. So set goals and milestones that you're in control of achieving. You control how high quality your content is. You absolutely control that. People always ask, they think 1,500, you know, if I post a 1,500 word article, that means it's high quality. Not necessarily. Typically, longer content is high quality. You know, most sites that are posting 500 to 700 words per article are going to be beat out by sites posting 1,500 to 2,000 words per article. At Stopping Scams, as I record this just the other day, we published what was it? It was like a 14, no exaggeration, it was like a 14,800 word article about how to get traffic, about how to get traffic and promote your blog. You know, that's a high quality post. But even then, someone could write 14,800 words of gibberish and it's not a high quality post. So you have to keep those things in mind. But we'll talk about specifically what quality is later in the training. You'll have a very clear understanding of that. Don't panic. But you control how high quality your content is. Word count, you control as well. That's not exactly a good indicator, but again, we'll talk about that later in the training, exactly how to create high quality content and what that entails. You control that. You control which keywords you're targeting. You control how much keyword research you do, how thoroughly you dig in. We'll talk about this in the training later too, but depending on what keywords you're picking, depending on what keywords you are aiming to rank for, that you're writing your articles about, you determine a huge amount of whether you're going to succeed or fail. So we'll talk about that very thoroughly when we get to the keyword research section. You control that. That is in your control. You control how many times you post per week. You control how many hours you work per week. You control how efficient you are, how many posts you can get out in the number of hours you can put in a week, how many quality posts you can post if you put in X amount of hours per week. So you're in control of these things. So it makes a lot more sense that you would set goals based on, I want to post X amount of high quality articles per week. I want to improve my efficiency. I want to I need to look at, I need to tune things, put processes in place so that instead of posting one article in 20 hours of work, I want to be posting 2 or 3 articles that are the same amount of quality, the same high quality content, but I'm doing 2 or 3 times as much. You control that efficiency. So those are the goals you should be setting. How many posts, high quality posts you're putting out per week, how many posts you're getting out per amount of hours. So in other words, on average, how many hours is it taking you to put out a high quality post? Those are goals and kind of things that you're in control of that you can tweak. You can absolutely tweak those things and make a tremendous difference in your internet marketing business. We know that a lot of high quality content with carefully chosen keywords will bring traffic. That's what I'm going to spend the next several sections teaching, inside and out, left to right, just leaving no gaps, no questions about it. We know this. We know this. High quality content posted repeatedly over time, as long as you stick with it, will bring traffic. Traffic will bring money. End of story. If you're in a buying niche, I should say. If you're not in a buying niche too, technically speaking, it's just going to be a heck of a lot easier on you, and you're going to need a lot less traffic, which makes the goal so much more attainable if you are in a buying niche. And again, we will talk about that very explicitly when we get to the picking a niche section. So how to set yourself up for success when you're setting goals, okay? Focus, this kind of takes home what I was talking about earlier. Focus on task-oriented goals rather than money-oriented goals. That sets you up for success so much better because you're in control of those tasks. If you have every right to get upset at yourself if you're missing those task-based goals. If you're saying, I wanted to post 3 high-quality articles per week and I'm missing that, you have every right to get upset at yourself. If you said, I want to be making $1,000 per week by the end of 6 months, or I want to be making $1,000 per month at the end of 6 months, even despite your best efforts, if you hit all of the other tasks that that could have amounted to that, but for some reason it's not happening, it's just not connecting yet, you really shouldn't be that mad at yourself. You should be mad at yourself for setting an income-based goal, a money-based goal, and learn from that. But you shouldn't be mad at yourself because so many things were out of your control. You did everything you could to achieve that, it just didn't amount to it, right? So you just have to kind of adjust and keep going. Again, you just have to keep plowing forward and you will succeed eventually. You can control how perfectly and consistently you execute tasks. You can't control what happens after that, right? You're in total control of the tasks, what tasks you aim for, how many hours you're putting in for a week, and how perfectly you execute those. You can't control what comes after that. You just kind of have to do the best you can. At the end of the day, you've got to give it everything you've got, and if you don't hit, kind of the loosely based goals, again, you don't want to get too attached to those financial goals. It's okay to have them in mind. Just know, okay, reverse engineer it to, I want 50 high quality posts, and hopefully that's going to bring me around $1,000 a month. Or I want 100 high quality posts within the next year. You can break that down into approximately 2 really high quality posts every week. And if you're at the end of that year and you're not hitting the kind of income that you wanted to hit, then at least you have a really good idea of, okay, this is what I need to keep doing. These are the things that are working. If I keep hitting these little, these are my really highly productive key performance indicators, my KPIs. If I keep hitting these, I'm gonna be able to get to this goal. So just kind of adjust. Don't get overwhelmed and give up and get down on yourself. Just learn from the mistake, learn from the lesson, give it everything you've got, leave it all out there, and then let the cards fall where they may. Okay, hitting a certain level of income may take more time than you were originally envisioned, but you're eventually going to get there, guaranteed, if you just keep trying. The only way you're going to miss that income goal ultimately in the long run is if you give up, period. All right. So That's the end of section 2. Again, confetti cannons. I wish I had them. I should invest in those. Um, so end of section 2, mindset training. I hope, again, that as you finish this section, you feel so much more empowered than you ever have going into this journey anywhere else. And if it's your first time, I'm hoping you feel empowered. You may not have anything to compare it to say, hey, this was so much better than all of the other training I've seen. But I humbly believe that this sets people up better in this industry, better than anything else that's out there. I mean, I really, really do. And again, I say that from a point of humility. I've just been at this long enough. I've reviewed hundreds of products. I know what makes for a really good product. And over the years, I've kind of borrowed these different teaching methods and learned so much from all of these other people and learned from my personal mentors. Most importantly, learned from my own mistakes in my business, that I know that starting here is the right thing to do. And you're set up so much more for success, so much better for success, if you kind of drill these things into you and you kind of take them into your heart, you embed them in your brain, and okay, I'm ready for this journey ahead. And you are. You're suited up. You're ready for war now, right? So you can't fail. Remember, you can't fail if you never stop trying. There will be times of feeling overwhelmed. There will be times of feeling helpless. You just have to push through them and keep going. If you get traffic in a buying niche, again, we want to focus on traffic in the early stages. Everything else, be damned, okay? If you get traffic in a buying niche, you can absolutely make money, okay? So follow the training closely, okay? We're finally going to start getting into strategies and methods and getting into, screen sharing and all that kind of stuff, where you're looking over my shoulder and we're using tools and learning specific strategies. But just keep all of this in mind. Stick to the training closely. Set task-based goals based on the training. You'll have a really good idea of what realistic goals are as we go through the training, and stick with it. If you do that, you're going to succeed in internet marketing. It's just a matter of time. All right. So that's it for section 2. As always, if you have any questions, post them to the Facebook group. Again, totally free for registered members here. And hopefully myself and other members will be able to come along and help you. Hopefully we're creating a really good community over there. It's so early stage that I don't know yet, but I have a very specific vision in mind, and I think we're going to be able to do that together. So pop your questions in there. Other than that, if I've already talked about questions, so I don't need to say if you have any questions. So I'll just see you in the next video. Section 3, here we come.